Welcome to the Harmonic Convergence 2020. We're here on day 2 with our theme is Facing the Shadow, Fear, Vulnerability, and Courage. We're here with our guest, Paul Levy. Paul's teacher, author, speaker, and pioneer in the field of spiritual emergence. He's the author of The Madness of George Bush, A Reflection of Our Collective Psychosis, Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil, Awakened by Darkness, When Evil Becomes Your Father, and Quantum Revelation, a radical synthesis of science and spirituality. He's also a Buddhist practitioner for over 30 years and has intimately studied with some of the greatest spiritual masters of Tibet and Burma, and he continues to be a luminary and an insightful thought leader in the subjects of shadow, collective dreamlike nature of reality, and the evolution of consciousness. So it's an honor to have you here with us, Paul. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to take part in our Harmonic Convergence.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here with you. Really just can't thank you enough.
So our topic today is facing the shadow. And I felt like you had some really insightful bits of wisdom on this idea of facing the shadow in your book, Dispelling Wetiko. So I thought just to start off, if you might describe to us a little bit of some of the things that you outlined in that book and how they relate to this idea of facing the shadow.
Well, the thing is that the shadow and projecting the shadow, that's really the underlying psychological sort of dynamic that underlies Wetiko. And what Wetiko is, it's an indigenous term, a Native American term, the Cree Indians. And it's the psychospiritual disease of the soul. You could think of it as like a virus of the mind in a way, and whose source is the human psyche. And it operates through the unconscious, through the blind spots, in such a way that we then unwittingly become its instrument. We act it out, and all the while it hides itself so that we're not aware that that's what we're doing. Mm. And so it operates through the projective tendencies of the mind. That's the important piece. And so that's where, and now also about Wetiko, there's so many things. I mean, I could write a book about it. I did, and I just wrote a second book that, will be published soon. And the idea being that what Wetiko is, the origin is in the psyche, which means that it will influence our perceptions in such a way that we entrance ourselves, that we hypnotize ourselves, and we become, in a way, conditioned by our own reactions and by our own projections. So one of the things about Wetiko, which is just amazing, is that it's an inner disease of the soul, but it expresses itself through the medium of the outside world. So in a way, it somehow magically extends itself out into the seemingly outer world, configuring actual events in the world so as to synchronistically express and reflect the psyche of a person who's under its thrall. So that's really interesting, because that's pointing at there's this connection between the inner condition of our soul or a psyche and the outer circumstances of our life, that the two are actually reflecting each other. And I would add that's very much just like a dream. Okay, now then getting to the shadow, if I can say a little bit about that, because the projecting of the shadow is the dynamic, the underlying psychological dynamic that informs and underlies Wetiko. And it's a way of really understanding it. Because the thing about Wetiko, it only operates to the extent that we don't see it. When we become awake to it, how it's operating by configuring itself non-locally through the field and via our inner reactions of our unconscious minds, as long as we don't see how it does that, we're then under its spell. But the point is that what my work is about is trying to shed light on that dynamic, its covert operations, so that we take away its power and we empower ourselves. And how it works through the projecting of the shadow is very simple. So think about it. We all have a shadow, this darker part. I mean, it can also be a golden shadow, but that's another thing. The part of us that we dissociate the enlightened part, we project out too. But I'm talking about, think about the really like the darker, despised, rejected, parts of our psyche, we then, to the extent we're not owning it, we dissociate from it. We project it outside of ourselves, and as a way of trying to actually not associate with it, to get rid of it, to destroy it, because we don't have the strength to see our own darkness and to own it and to integrate it into our wholeness. So then we project it out into the world. You see, the way to see Wetiko is to recognize that we're having a collective dream. In essence, that's the real fundamental, perspective that my whole work is based on. And in a dream, when you project out like this darker quality, what is a dream but a reflection of your process? So then the dream will just guaranteed serve you all the evidence you need, certain figures who will actually embody that darkness, that shadow that you've split off from, dissociated, projected out, and literally dreamed up into the dream. And as soon as you then have people who embody, who epitomize that shadow, all of a sudden, now you have all the evidence you need, confirming to yourself that the evil, the shadow, is outside of yourself. And as soon as you assume that viewpoint, you even get more entrenched in that viewpoint of thinking the darkness is outside of yourself. And the more you think the darkness is outside of yourself, being like a dream, the more the dream-like nature will just confirm that viewpoint, because it's nothing other than a reflection of your mind. That's what a dream is. And, ad infinitum. And what the result of that is you've entranced yourself. You've hypnotized yourself by the creative power of your own mind, thinking the evil is outside of yourself. And then what do? Of course, you try to destroy that evil, which is an outer reflection of the inner process that started the whole thing of shadow projecting, where you wanted to get rid of your own shadow. So now you're seeing it out there, so you want to get rid of and try to destroy the carriers of that shadow. But in doing that, you literally become possessed by the very evil that you're trying to get rid of. And that's total madness. And that's Wetiko. That's the psychological sort of articulation of how the bug works. And when that's being acted out collectively in the greater body politic, you have a collective psychosis. And that's what Wetiko is. It's a collective psychosis, as we see all around us today.
And, I love this aspect that you're talking about too, where there's an old saying, the hand that crushes the tyrant's head becomes a tyrant in its stead,
Right.
kind of thing that it sounds to me like you're describing. And what's interesting to me as well, that I would love to hear your thoughts on, how the revealing of this Wetiko, or of this mind virus, or the manifestation of it in our outer world, coincides as well with awakening experiences, either on an individual level or a collective level.
Yeah, well, the thing about Wetiko, it's a quantum phenomena. And what I mean by saying it's a quantum phenomena is that encoded in the virus, in the mind virus, it's the source of the greatest evil that we play out, in our own mind, with each other, and collectively in the greater body politic. And in a superposition of states, it's also the catalyst for us to awaken, for us to recognize the dreamlike nature. And so that's what I mean, that it's a quantum phenomena, that there's a superposition of states of the deepest evil and the greatest light encoded in the Wetiko phenomena. And how it manifests all depends on if we recognize what it's actually showing us. And, so that's really, really interesting, because when you really get down to it, there's no such thing as Wetiko. It doesn't even exist. It has no independent existence at all, separate from our mind. Right. And yet it can destroy our species. And so the thing is, encoded in the mind virus, which is the source of the greatest evil that is being acted out all over the place, is the medicine. And not just the medicine to cure the virus, but it's actually helping us even more than just curing the virus. It's actually catalyzing us to evolve and to wake up. Right. And that's what my work is about, is trying to show, well, when you look at it this way, when you actually recognize what it's a revelation of, it's revealing to us the creative power that all of us have. And we all have it 24/7 to create our experience of ourselves and our experience of the world. But because we're unconscious of that creative power, we're carrying it and we're using it, in a way that's turning against us and is destroying us. And so all that I'm basically saying is, hey, look at what, there's a revelation happening through the world process, through the Wetiko disease, through the coronavirus, which is itself this lower level reflection of the higher dimensional, like the Wetiko virus of the mind. And when you begin to see that is when you actually begin to wake up to the dreamlike nature, your place in it, to who you are, and to your unbelievable, all of us have this incredible, unimaginable creative power. And particularly when we connect with each other, that's when all bets are off. That's when we can really change things. And that's what this is all about. And we're being invited to participate in our own, in evolution, in our human evolution. And particularly when we connect with other people who are waking up to that, that's when we can really, make an incredible difference with what's happening in the world.
Yeah, wonderful. And that's definitely part of the bigger intention here of the harmonic convergence is sort of like applying that creative power that we all have towards a meditation for peace and moving more into balance. And it's interesting what you talk about, because it's almost as if in the way you're describing it, that this Wetiko doesn't actually have any agency within this realm, but is given its agency and its ability to act through our subconscious programming of acting it out.
Right. Well, we give it, for example, it can't steal our soul, to use an example, but it tricks us into giving our soul away. Right. So that's the thing. And, now talking about the shadow, one of the shadows in a lot of, the best people I know, a lot of these spiritual people, new age people who are really into harmonic convergence or awakening or love and compassion, one of the shadows is, I just want to open my heart and send love, and all that's incredibly essential and important. But our inner process is actually, it's manifesting via the medium of the outside world, which is to say that the way we actually access our inner process is to step into life and to actually participate. This is a universe. This is a participatory world that we're actively, collaboratively co-creating. So for people who just are like, oh, I'm just all about love and light, and I just want to meditate and open my heart, and if that's it, then they're unwittingly being an agent of darkness, because the other half of it is, to genuinely step into whatever role is yours in the dream. And that doesn't mean we need to be like political activists in an overt way or writers like I'm a writer. No, it just means we have to ascend. We're being called like a shaman. We're being called by something higher than ourselves, by the spirits, you could say. And just like a shaman, when they get called, if they don't ascend and say, okay, I will cooperate with the calling, and then once they do that, they get sponsored, they get supported. But if they fight against that deeper calling for whatever reason, oh, I'm not good enough, or I don't have the right degrees, that's typically when the shaman, and the shaman is the wounded healer. It's when we're all the wounded healer, but if the idea being that if they actually cooperate with that calling, that's when, and invariably that necessitates a descent into the underworld of the unconscious, into the darkness, into the shadow. And but if they don't get caught in that, they're able to bring back these like whatever, some sort of gifts or blessings that are of benefit for the whole community. And what I'm describing is all of us, but the point is that for us to access the creative spirit, and whatever, not in a flatland way, like we just have to paint or draw or whatever, just the way we are in the world, if we're really embodying, being creative, that in essence, and that involves really finding our voice, being who we are. And that in a sense is to really be a real activist. And that's to really be of benefit, for the planet.
Mm-hmm. So, I can see that, and I've read about you that you're a Buddhist practitioner, and can see that behind you, this beautiful altar, wonderful. And I'm just curious with this idea of Wetiko, because you're coming at it from this angle of you're saying as well it's a Cree word and things like this. And so I'm just curious for how your own personal process of uncovering this fundamental concept happened.
Totally. No, I appreciate that. And I'm not writing as a scholar or an academic. I mean, even though I'm kind of a nerd and I study a lot and I footnote all these things, but I encountered Wetiko in my own personal life, and it almost killed me, and it destroyed my entire family. And what happened, I mean, I'm 63 now. When I was in my early 20s, I'm an only child, and without going into the story, my father just unwittingly, like we all do, we have unhealed abuse, and then to the extent we're not dealing with it, we just act it out and pass it on to our husband or wife or kids or whoever. And my father just didn't, process his own unhealed abuse, and literally so just unconsciously acted it out. And I was the sensitive kid, and I was the recipient of the abuse. And, all in the realm of psyche, not physical abuse so much. And it just created this enormous wound and trauma for me when I was in my early 20s. And I went from being a highly functioning kid, very good at school, to all of a sudden, I couldn't live my life. I was in such deep suffering. And so then the only thing I figured out that could help to deal with it was to go inwards and to watch and to be the witness of my process. And I did that just hours and hours and hours a day because my intellect wasn't helping at all. And after a couple of years of doing that, I had this full-blown awakening. I got hit by a bolt of lightning in my brain and went into a complete altered state and was recognizing, oh my God, we're having a collective dream. And then things began happening in my life that could only happen in dreams, that were completely physically 100% impossible, or at least according to what I had been conditioned to think of as being possible. And then within the first day of that awakening, I was thrown in mental hospitals, and that next, under 2 years, I was probably thrown, because I was a free agent, and I was so ecstatic and enthusiastic at what I was realizing that I alerted the anti-bliss patrol, is what I joke with my friends, the authorities, because I had had a radical personality change overnight. Once I had my awakening, I just couldn't contain the ecstasy and the enthusiasm. So during that next almost 2 years, I got hospitalized 3 or 4 or 5 other times, and always diagnosed as, oh, you're mentally ill, you're chemically imbalanced. They had just come out with the chemical imbalance theory the year before in the DSM-3. And I knew they had no idea what they were talking about. I mean, that's what saved me, and how I.
Sorry,
what's that?
What's the DSM-3?
Oh, the diagnostic manual. It's the Bible. It's like the grimoire for psychiatry, where they cast spells. Right. And that's how they look. Oh, manic depression or bipolar. That's the diagnosis. Yeah, that had just come out the year before, and that was announcing the new discovery of the chemical imbalance. And keep in mind, since then, the same authors, the same psychiatrists who wrote the DSM-3 have since come out and said, oh, by the way, there's no such thing as a chemical imbalance. That was made up by the pharmaceutical companies so that they could sell more drugs and make more money. But what saved me was that it couldn't have been made more clear to me that I was having a spiritual awakening. And so I just my entire universe had bought into that I was mentally ill. And as they were diagnosing me, I was just diagnosing them as being totally ignorant. So I never got hooked. I never bought into the diagnoses at all. And then I quickly got out of psychiatry and just continued my awakening, and, found my teachers, these great Tibetan lamas or other monks or nuns. And, but I was so traumatized, it took me over a dozen years of integrating what was being shown to me. But the point is, that same darker energy that was coming through my father, that had possessed him and was using him to be an instrument, at a certain point, I had the recognition, oh my God, that same darker energy, it's non-local. It was transcending the rules and law of space and time, and was now coming through psychiatry. And I was recognizing, oh my God, it's the same dark energy that whenever light is emerging, it wants to try to obliterate it. But simultaneously, it was it was showing me something. It was like this living revelation. And, so that's when I began to actually really encounter Wetiko in a way that I was mapping it, and I was beginning to understand, oh my God, this is a non-local energy whose origin is inside of us that plays out through the world, that gets activated when we transduce light, but it's actually supporting the light if you actually recognize that aspect of it. And if you don't, it'll kill you.
Right. It's kind of performing an important function, right?
Oh, totally. Like I say in my work, that if Wetiko didn't exist, we would have to invent it. It's the greatest catalyst for evolution of our species that we've ever known.
Mm-hmm. And so, one of the tags we have for today is fear and vulnerability and courage, those three aspects.
Right.
So it's pretty clear to me how fear can play into this idea of Wetiko or facing the shadow. How does vulnerability and courage play into your idea?
Yeah. Sure. Well, the thing about fear is like, that's the food for Wetiko. It feeds off of fear and separation. As long as we're in the separate self, identifying with the ego, the separate self, I'm here in my skin encapsulated ego, and you're out there separate from me, seeing, and I see you as an other, then, there's fear. Fear co-arises with a sense of otherness, with a sense of separation, and Wetiko feeds off of fear. That's why with the coronavirus, the real virus is the fear that it's activating in everybody. And so when we have fear, then one of the other things that Wetiko feeds off of is when there's separation and where we get into like sort of this polarized point of view in our world right now. Our body politic, our country has never been so polarized. And then behind the scenes, you can envision the Wetiko bug is just feasting off of the fear and polarization. But the idea of actually having vulnerability, having the courage to be vulnerable, to face the part of us that has a shadow. We all were a combination of light and dark, and to have that, that real strength and courage to self-reflect. And what I mean by that is when the universe, whether it's through another person or it's just the field, when it reflects back our shadow, and interestingly, etymologically, mirror, the word mirror etymologically means the holder of the shadow. So when we look into the mirror and we see our shadow, if we don't have enough courage, we turn away. And that turning away, that's our complicity. That's then Wetiko feeds off of our being an ostrich and putting our head in the sand, And so you see, the key thing about my work in Wetiko is pointing out, how are we complicit with the evil? And so, for example, if we see somebody out there, whoever, say a politician, and they're at a certain moment embodying Wetiko, embodying this evil, and if we think, oh, wow, they're embodying Wetiko, they're evil, then and if we assume that viewpoint, that they're separate from us and the evil is out there, then having that viewpoint, we then have offered ourselves to be another vector of Wetiko by being in that polarized point of view. But if we recognize, wow, that person out there, whoever he is, or she, and if they're playing out Wetiko, and if we recognize that, and we recognize we're looking in a mirror, and we're seeing, oh, they're a dream character, they're reflecting that part of me, then all of a sudden, that's to dispel Wetiko, and that's to begin talking about the shadow. That's to begin to own the shadow, and that's to begin to cultivate real, like this compassion, genuine compassion, which is the Wetiko dissolver par excellence. Mm-hmm. And so you see, the thing about Wetiko, it's really seeing through, to the extent that we can see through that separate self and to recognize that the actual fact is that we're not separate. We're interconnected and interdependent with each other. And we're like these cells in a greater body, and we all depend on each other for the survival of each one of us and for the whole body politic of humanity.
Mm-hmm. So within that, then, with this example that you use, and I know that you wrote a book, sounds like it's kind of about some of these topics on George Bush and the madness of George Bush and how it reflects our collective madness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in practical terms, when we can recognize this, you know, because right now, all sides of the world, particularly since coronavirus started, there's all kinds of people getting blaming this one or that one or this group or that group, et cetera, et cetera. So what are some really practical ways that we can address that, and particularly within the contents of this harmonic convergence, how we can address that in a practical way so as we can arrive in a place to actually be cleaned out, courageous vehicle?
That's such a great question. I so appreciate that. And two things come to mind. On the one hand, one of the ways Wetiko works, so, you know, the way to think about it like, you know, this bug in the system in our mind, and it will actually, you know, by influencing our perceptions, it will like help us to get sort of distracted by thinking the problem is outside of ourselves. So as soon as we put the attention outside of ourselves, then it feasts on that dynamic, because the origin of Wetiko is inside of us, inside of our minds, inside of our soul, in a way. You know, it actually exists in the collective unconscious. It's not a personal thing. And so to the extent we then like put our attention outside of ourselves, and then if we don't have the recognition that we're looking in a mirror, and then we react, you know, to what we're thinking of as being objectively true, and then we become conditioned by our reactions ad infinitum in a feedback loop, in an infinitely self-perpetuating feedback loop whose origin is our own mind, okay? So that's one thing, is to really bring awareness to that tendency in us to think the problem actually exists outside of ourselves. And that's not to say that things aren't playing out in our world that are deeply problematic, but here's the other thing that comes up. Say if you see, you know, something, you know, evil or the shadow or Wetiko, and it's outside of ourselves out there. And then, of course, you see, when you see the unconscious, it's non-local. And what that means, you know, non-local is like, yeah, it transcends the laws of three-dimensional of time and space. And so it's impossible to see the unconscious being acted out there without having your own unconscious activated. So in other words, say you see somebody playing out Wetiko, guaranteed you're going to be triggered. Or if somebody, even your partner or your mother or father or son or daughter, whoever, they're playing out something and we get triggered, right? We all know that experience. That's an intimate experience. And yet what most of us do, we, like I was saying, we think the problem is out there. Oh, if only that person who's triggering me would change their behavior, then the problem would be solved. But at that moment, there's an incredible opportunity. What if we turn our attention onto what inside of us is being triggered, what the source of the trigger is? Then all of a sudden we can get to some deep talk about shadow, some unconscious shadow in ourselves. And that's actual spiritual practice. That's a real, an advanced practice in Tibetan Buddhism. And so that would be taking it out of the realm of this, you know, esoteric, abstract idea, like, you know, Wetiko, and actually bringing it into our moment by moment experience of interacting with each other.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, I know that you wrote just recently, and you touched on it briefly here, about the coronavirus and its connection with Wetiko. And I know you have another addendum to Dispelling Wetiko coming out soon. I wondered if you would like to talk about that, because it seems like this work is that you're that you're sharing with us from these past years comes even more relevant in these times right now, where things are so heightened and many people are in a fear
totally.
mode, you know.
Yeah. And I basically, in essence, I mean, I wrote a whole article about how the coronavirus is, like I was saying, is this reflection, this lower level emanation of the higher dimensional Wetiko virus of the mind. So say if we, heal the coronavirus and we get back to normal, I mean, on the one hand, great. On the other hand, that would be catastrophic if we don't see what the coronavirus, it was a revelation of something in us, of something in our minds. And, when I point out that the coronavirus isn't just physical, it has multiple sort of aspects. And one of them is psychic, that it, just think about how it impacted so many dimensions of our day-to-day existence, including our psyche. People got stressed out and anxious and fearful and all of that. That's one of the vectors of and changing our behavior. And that's one of the ways that it operates. And, so what I'm pointing out is that both Wetiko, the coronavirus, the madness, the evil that's playing out in the world, it's this revelation that this universe is a living oracle. And it's actually speaking symbolically in symbols of the language of dreams. And when you actually have that recognition, and that's the step out of, the materialistic point of view, the linear sort of dualistic point of view. And that's to more step into the logic of quantum physics, which I would love to talk about in a minute, and also this being a dream, because you discover, wow, this universe being an oracle, it's continually speaking to us. It's this revelation. And that's actually, reflecting and showing us the very thing we need in order to wake up. But if we don't have the recognition of what it's revealing to us, then we're just fated. We're going to be doomed. We're going to continue to just destroy ourselves. And but what I'm pointing out in my work is that as more and more of us, as we awaken to the dreamlike nature, and one way to understand this is imagine being in a dream and you have this lucidity and you've woken up to the nature of your situation. That is that you're dreaming, that the universe you're in, the dream universe, is not objective, that it's a function of your consciousness. And you've woken up to that. And then other of your dream characters who are parts of yourself, just imagine that they've also woken up to that. And then imagine you connect with each other. And this, I think, is what I imagine the Harmonic Convergence 2020 is about. And you trip out and you contemplate, wow, what are we realizing? We're realizing this dream universe we're inhabiting, we're living in, is manifesting the way it is because that's the way we've been conditioned to dream it, based on trauma and fear and separation and Wetiko, or whatever you call it. When you realize that, you realize, oh my God, we can put what I call the sacred power of our dreaming together, and you could literally change the dream. And keep in mind, I'm describing a night dream, so that's easy to imagine, but I'm pointing out that's the nature of our situation in the waking dream. And then when that's what this is all about, and that's evolutionary, and it's all a question, do we recognize what's openly being revealed to us? And particularly when you connect with other people, then you can activate the genius, the collective genius of all of us, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And we discover we can literally dream ourselves awake. And that's to actually talk about a conspiracy theory. That's to conspire, to co-inspire each other, which is actually what is available to us. We can actually really deepen each other's awakening process. It's not a competitive sport. Who's more awakening? If I help you, I get as much benefit as you do because we're not separate. And, so that's why it's so inspiring for me when I connect with other people who are also plugging into this and are bringing it forth in their own creative way.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And so within all of this, they're talking about Wetiko. I'd love for you to talk about how that ties all in with the quantum revelation and physics.
Yeah. Totally. And keep in mind, I'm completely not a physicist. I just had this spiritual awakening, close to 40 years ago. And then when I became aware of quantum physics, I began to realize, oh my God, this precisely articulates the very universe that I had fallen into. And so then I just more and more began studying, just as a curious person, not as a physicist, quantum physics. And I began to realize, oh my God, quantum physics is revealing to us. You see, in Tibetan Buddhism, just quickly, there's a thing called Terma. Terma is the hidden treasure tradition. It's the lineage I do practice to. And the idea is that the way that the actual tradition propagates itself and keeps itself fresh is that they're encoded in the fabric of the universe are these hidden treasures, these enlightened teachings and objects that have blessings. And then exactly at the right moment in time, they're discovered right at the point when they're needed. And, it's very much like a dream. A dream is a compensation. So when we get one-sided, the dream creates a symbol that compensates the one-sidedness. That's the idea of terma, of hidden treasure. And like I just gave a big talk about this a few months ago, that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a terma. It's like the universe secreted quantum physics into the world. It was discovered 100 or so years ago and into our minds as a hidden treasure, because what quantum physics is revealing to us is the medicine for Wetiko. Okay, and what I mean, it's very, very simple. Wetiko, like I was describing, we become entranced by our projections so that we hypnotize ourselves. We trick ourselves out of our minds, okay? And we become insane in a real way. We react to our projections and then become conditioned by that. And well, here quantum physics, what is it showing us? The universe before quantum physics, the classical universe, quantum, which they thought, oh, we're just exploring this objective world and trying to understand it. Well, quantum physics basically proved that objective world didn't exist. There was no such thing. And more than that, the act of observing this universe actually influenced the universe observed, just like a dream. That's exactly an articulation of a dream. So in other words, what that's pointing at is that the act of observation is creative, okay? And that's the rabbit hole that I go down, because then when you discover that, when you really understand, wait a second, what is that revealing to us? Well, once you discover that there's nothing objective out there, well, wait a second. What happened to the subject? I, as a subject, as an ego, need an object to be in relationship to in order to be a subject. If there's no object, who am I? You see, so all of a sudden, quantum physics promotes itself to be a spiritual path because it's shedding light on our nature, not just the nature of the universe. And keep in mind, quantum physics was trying to understand the building blocks, the microstructure of this universe. And the more it found the building blocks, and then the matter and form just disappeared, and all that was left was consciousness. That somehow consciousness is a key factor in the equation of the universe. And so by actually pointing out that, on the one hand, it's discovered, absolutely empirically proven that this is a collective dream, and that it's showing that the act of observation is creative, that we have this enormous creative potency. Like I was saying before, that if we're unaware of it, it gets turned against us in a way that is not only not serving us, but is killing us. And so here quantum physics is being a hidden treasure, or terma, is actually the medicine if we have the recognition of what it's revealing to us. And that is, in essence, what I wrote about in my latest quantum physics book.
Fantastic. And just kind of, I feel like you've gone over some amazing topics here, sharing us with your book and your different books. And I'm just thinking about how all of these sort of treasures and jewels of experience from your life and insight with as well your personal experience and your meditative practice, if you could offer someone some advice. We're going through this 10-day period here. We're in an awakening process on Mother Earth. There's been the clarity and chaos that's come with this coronavirus, with the increasing civil unrest, mm-hmm. with the monumental times that we're in.
Yeah.
And so what would be, like, in the simplest terms, like the advice that you would give someone to transmute and to metabolize the challenges of these times in an
Right,
effective
right.
way?
No, I love your questions. Thank you. And for me, the change really starts with the individual, with each one of us, you know. And then it's the idea like, you know, if any one of us, you know, if we wake up or own our shadow, that immediately affects non-locally the whole universe and makes it that much easier for somebody else to do it. But what came in my mind as you were asking the question, I literally just came out with a new article just today. It sounds like you already saw it about, you know, yeah, here I mentioned the shaman and the wounded healer. Now, the thing which is interesting to me about the figure of the shaman, and we're all shamans in training, is that a shaman takes on the illness of the client or the community and they literally become ill. So by taking it on, they both confront it and they take it within themselves and they literally fall ill. So they experience the illness not out there, but from the inside. But what makes somebody an accomplished shaman is that they're able to find their way back to their wholeness, back to their health. And by doing that energetically, it's helping, you know, helping the other person and the community to more probably be able to heal too. So the shaman, it's related to the wounded healer. And for years, I still have this wound from, you know, my father and psychiatry. And for years, I would be like, oh, I have to get rid of this. I have to heal this. But more and more, I've discovered, wow, there's a way of carrying it. This is the archetype of the wounded healer. And this is going to answer your question, I think, that there's a way of carrying your wound that it becomes a portal for you to access your gifts. And so the idea being, so the article I just wrote, I say, yeah, each and every moment, going back to the individual, each of us, I can talk for me. Oh, I feel my wound in this moment. Oh, how am I going to interpret that? Because that's where our power, that's where we have creative power, the meaning we place on our experience. Am I going to interpret the fact that I feel my wound right now as evidence that I really am wounded? And then if I interpret it that way, then I'm dreaming myself up to be a wounded person. And the more I dream myself up that way, the more I'm going to invoke evidence confirming that I am wounded in a self-generating feedback loop whose origin is my own mind. But in that same moment of my wound coming up, if I have awareness that instead of, oh, this is something that happened way back in the past and it exists objectively, and now I have confirmation of it because I'm feeling it right now. What about if that experience of being wounded, of my wound coming up, it's only arising in the present moment and it's only arising in my awareness? And if I realize that, well, what if it's releasing itself? And a beautiful image of that, just like when you have a mirror and its reflections, think about the wound as being the reflections. And you see the reflections. The first way where you get caught by the wound is to either absorb in the reflection or identify with the reflection or contract against it. But all of that is making the reflection solid and objective and real. And thereby that wound has power over us. But if we all of a sudden, in that same circumstance of the wound being the reflection coming up in the mirror, and we recognize, wait a second, that's just the display of the mirror, the impermanent display, and who I am in all of this is the mirror. That's my nature. And that mirror, and Christ himself in the apocryphal text, what does he say? He says, I am a mirror to those that know me, you know, but we would never see the mirror without the reflections. That's like Wetiko. We would never recognize who we actually are without something that's contrary to who we are. That's the idea. Right. And so in that moment of the wounding coming up, it's actually a gift. If we recognize that instead of identifying with it or judging it or whatever, like I was saying, it can actually reveal the mirror-like nature of our mind, which is our true nature. And that, I think, is like, would be the best advice, because I know we're all feeling like a shaman. We've gotten sickened by what's happening in our world. Our world, Wetiko, is a collective psychosis. And the fact that we can metabolize that and find ourselves back to ourselves, to our mirror-like nature, not only is that helping us, that helps the whole universe. That's really our offering.
Beautiful. And so before we close today, Paul, why don't you let everybody know what you have coming up next, where we can find you online, and for anybody that wants to know more about your work.
Sure. Well, no, I'm just writing and writing like mad. It's the way I joke with my friends that I'm writing like mad these days to keep myself sane in this coronavirus time. And it's an example of, instead of just whatever, getting caught up or indulging in whatever we do to avoid relationship with ourselves, I've been saying to people to just get creative, and thankfully I'm able to do that. And then as far as getting in touch with me, I have this website, awakeninthedream.com. And if you go to awakeninthedream.com, there's just a ton of articles, a ton of interviews. It's all for free because I just want to get this, my friends joke, I need to monetize my site, and I'm not into that. I'm just, no, I want to get, this is really helping people. It really can inspire people. And then, I have some books. You can buy the books if you want. But that's really, I'm not a social media person. I don't, whatever. So that would be the way to go to my website, awakeninthedream.com.
Great. So it's awakeninthedream.com. Paul Levy, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today, the Harmonic Convergence 2020. And blessings on everything you're doing in the future, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, really. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll see you all next time.